Oh, it's good.
Okay. My 6-year-old nephew had to teach me something on my iPhone, so that's a sign that I need to update to sharpen my tech skills.
Just accept defeat.
Or just accept defeat. But I'm a consultant now. I don't have millennials around that'll do this kind of thing for me.
Oh, yeah. The Gen Xers, they're the best.
Right. Well, that's what I am. Okay.
No, I meant Gen Z, I meant to say. They're
Okay.
even smarter.
Okay, let's get started. Let's just begin with a few moments of meditating on the breath and settling our minds into the present. Let go of our conceptualization. Focus on the breath. I'm setting a positive motivation for this morning. We can bring to mind the 7 billion other people on this planet, countless other animals and types of beings. Feel in our hearts their wish. Their wish for things to go well. And not have pain and problems. This goes for everyone we care about. This goes for all the people we have difficulty with. And everyone else. And thinking about the inevitability of their continued pain. Problems, loss, frustration. Because they're still under the control of mental afflictions. You create the causes for Okay. Develop a wish. Develop our own inner qualities further and further. Actualize our own inner potential. In order to be a greater benefit. Myself and all these other. Okay, so we've been talking about the Four Noble Truths and specifically the true origins in the past couple of weeks. Let's go to slide number 3. Yeah, and just a reminder that the one before that. So just a reminder that our suffering, according to Buddhism, our suffering is caused by contaminated karma and the mental affliction. All of our suffering can be those one or both of those two. And between those two, afflictions are the main cause of our suffering. We reduce and ultimately eliminate the afflictions, and we no longer create negative karma and contaminated karma. So we've been talking about the afflictions. The next slide, just a reminder that an affliction is an awareness that causes the mental continuum or the mind to be very unpeaceful when it arises. So the affliction has the characteristic of making the mind unpeaceful, making the mind uneasy, making the mind agitated. The next slide. So the main 3 afflictions with the 3 poisons are attachment, aversion or hatred / anger, and ignorance. So we talked about attachment last time, so we're going to go into anger today. Next slide. So the definition of anger in the Dharma, and this is very important because I think a lot of people misunderstand what anger is in the Dharma. So a definition according to Geshe Loden is anger is a mental factor that perceives its object as unattractive, exaggerates its unattractiveness, becomes antagonistic, and wishes to harm the object. Right? So anger is something right where it's there's not just an unpeaceful mind, not just a mind that's unhappy or annoyed or displeased in the Dharma. There's a deeper feeling of antagonism and wishing to harm. And so when we hear about anger being so destructive in the Dharma and ruining so many roots of virtue, it's this aspect of the extreme agitation of the mind that wants to lash out. There's this urge to punish, this urge to hurt, for example, hurt the other person as much as they've hurt us. And so that is what makes it so destructive, is this urge to hurt, right? If we think about the causes of happiness, like the true causes of happiness in the Dharma, like those behaviors and those mental states that bring about happiness in the long term, are those behaviors and those mental states that bring about peace of mind, that bring about a contentment of mind, brings about, happiness and joy and mental well-being, right? Like pure love brings a peaceful, happy, well mind. Contentment brings, a peaceful mind. Generosity, the mind of generosity is a very peaceful, happy mind. The mind of, so on and on, wisdom, compassion, etc. They all bring about this peaceful, happy, wellness of mind. So why is anger so destructive? Is because it does the exact opposite. Anger brings about an extremely agitated mind. It harms our peacefulness of mind. It's impossible to be angry and peaceful. It's impossible to be angry and happy at the same time. Right? And then on top of that, the urge to harm, to hurt others, is the opposite of the mind that wants benefit others, that wants happiness for oneself. So anger is harmful to oneself and is harmful to others. So the next slide, I want to contrast the definition of anger according to the Dharma versus the common usage of the term anger in our English language. So at the bottom of this slide, from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of anger is a strong feeling of displeasure. Strong feeling of displeasure. So anger in the English language is not necessarily wishing to lash out. It's very, very easily can turn into wishing to lash out. But it in and of itself is not necessarily as destructive. It's not necessarily the wish to lash out. We can feel angry in the sense of that is not okay, right? You can't treat me like that without wanting to punish or hurt the other person. Or politicians, they shouldn't be doing those, corrupt things. So that is anger, and that's not necessarily anger that's being referred to in the Dharma. So I wanted to make that really clear because I don't think a lot of people know that anger in the Dharma is something a little bit different, right? It's a stronger anger than our common usage of the term. All right, so the next slide, I just wanted to give the etymology of the term anger in Tibetan. So this would be the Dharma anger. The Tibetan term is kontro, and the etymology is being disturbed from the depth. So anger in the Dharma is being disturbed from the depth. So the next slide. So I'm in today's class, I'm bringing together the Dharma, and I'm bringing in a little bit from anger management, because I've studied some anger management, I've taught anger management, and I think some of the points I wanted to bring in are really helpful. So this is the anger escalation curve. So we see, so the horizontal axis here is time, and the vertical is anger intensity. So anger begins with something minor like impatience. And then as we continue to engage in negative thinking, our anger grows, right? Like, right, if we think, oh, you're such a jerk. Oh, you know, and we start ruminating about all the terrible things that that person has done. The more we ruminate, the more the anger increases, or the impatience turns into irritation, which turns into anger and can turn into rage if we don't counteract it, right? Or if we continue to feed the angry thoughts, the anger continues to grow. So this gives us a real, a good clue as to how to work with anger when anger arises, is not feeding the anger, because the more we feed the anger, the stronger it becomes. Right, so at a certain point on this curve, it becomes anger according to. Yeah, and so the other point I wanted to make is that the earlier we counteract the anger, or the irritation, or the earlier we become mindful and stop feeding it, the more likely we'll be able to let it go. The higher it gets on this anger escalation curve, the harder it will be to let it go. And I once heard Geshe Sherab give a Tibetan analogy of, it's like holding a burning coal. The quicker, you know, the longer we hold it, the more harm it will do. And the quicker we let it go, the less harm. So the next slide, the function of the anger is, okay, so this is very technical. Gachin Yoshu Gyaltsen wrote in his Minds and Mental Factors text that anger has the function of causing one to not abide in happiness in this lifetime, and then produces immeasurable suffering. I don't know if you believe in the future. So anger makes it such that our mind cannot be happy now, when anger arises, and also, you know, anger does a lot of damage, which we'll talk about. So in the next slide, I thought that we could address first, well, what do we get out of anger? I mean, oftentimes we don't want to let go of our anger, because we get something out of it, right? So it's useful to just acknowledge what we do get out of it. And first thing is that anger feels powerful. If we're feeling like somebody is harming us, or we're feeling helpless, out of control, that's very uncomfortable. So we get angry, it feels powerful. It doesn't feel like we're helpless. It doesn't feel like we're out of control. A lot of times people get angry because it feels powerful. It gives them the illusion of strength. And I stress the illusion. anger is actually the easier. Patience is much more difficult. We'll talk about what anger also, I mean, especially expressing anger, we get people's attention. if we're feeling ignored or dismissed, right, that can trigger anger. And so we can get attention. Or maybe we think that we get our way when we're angry. Well, sometimes people will do what we want when we express anger, but in the longer term, people tend to feel resentful and fearful. Right? People are habitually angry. And to steer clear of people who are angry. Another big one is that anger, we may feel self-righteous. You did that. I would never do that. I'm superior to you. The next bullet is anger covers up painful emotions. So this is what I was referring to. Anger often covers up helplessness, hopelessness or fear, hurt, guilt, etc., shame. A friend of mine is a Dharma teacher, and she teaches in prisons. And she mentioned this to her prisoners, how anger covers up painful or vulnerable emotions, covers up shame and fear. And she said that the prisoners really, really resonated with that and found that really super helpful and revolutionary to themselves. They recognize that right, anger helps us not have to feel the painful emotions. Anger can cover those up. And then anger can temporarily release. So yeah, we do seem to get some things out of anger. But in the next slide, but in the long run, anger harms ourselves. Anger harms, I mean, I've heard the analogy of like the bee that stings. The bee, can harm others, but mostly the bee harms themselves when they sting. So anger is similar. Anger harms others, ourselves most of all. And when we respond to a problem with anger, it usually just creates another problem. Right? We have to do damage control. We lash out at someone, we say, right? Or we email someone in the midst of anger. It's very difficult to communicate constructively, right? In the midst of anger. It's very difficult to think clearly and to think in a balanced way. Right, there's the urge to lash out, urge to give that person a piece of our mind, urge to teach them a lesson, which, and an inability, if we're angry enough, there's an inability to see the other person's perspective, even want to see the person's perspective, right? In psychology, they talk about a refractory period. Whereas during that refractory period, right, when we're angry enough, we can't take in any constructive information. There's no, we're not open to taking in information about how the other person is going through a hard time, or how the other person didn't do it the way that we thought. How we may be making assumptions and projections that may not be actually. The next slide, expressing anger temporarily. So this is from an anger management book. Expressing anger temporarily helps us overcome feelings of helplessness and lack of control, but it disrupts relationships and makes us feel even more helpless and out of control.
Is that necessarily true, though?
What are you thinking?
Well, I had 3 different screwed up installations for cable TV this week. And and then finally I went down to the office. I didn't scream or anything, but I was like, you guys, gotta get your shit together. Come on, this is ridiculous. And they felt badly and they rushed somebody over and fit me in at the end of the day. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying anger, I want to have those emotions or whatever, but I'm saying it did get my cable installed. It didn't leave me more out of control.
Yeah. And let's skip actually to address that question. Let's go to slide number 16. I had a couple more slides because I think that's a really important point. And that, John, I think is the difference between maybe anger in English versus anger in the Dharma. So
Actually see the slide number because it's
the slide that says, can anger ever be constructive? Number 16. Do I have different? Maybe I have a different. Yeah, so that one. So I think anger in the English language might be possibly constructive. And here, I got this from Cultivating Emotional Balance, that series of teaching. So the anger in the sense of being extremely displeased, or anger in the sense of this is not okay, that can be, I think it can be constructive if it's preventing harm to oneself or others, or it's preventing bad behavior, but only if it's not lashing out or trying to harm, right? If we're trying to harm, then that of course is not helpful. But if it's just getting someone's attention and saying, hey, you need to fix this, I think that can be constructive. And I think in Buddhism, we might even call that wrath, right? There's a presentation of the difference between anger and wrath. Wrath is, or wrathful behavior, right, can be manifested in order to get somebody's attention, right?
Or if your child's about
peaceful means isn't helpful.
Right.
Sorry?
Oh, if your child's about to burn themselves on the stove, you're not like, oh, sweetheart, you want to avoid the heat element, right?
Right. Exactly. Right. So there's a strong behavior, right? And so patience does not mean just being meek and saying, oh, no, yeah, no, that's okay, right? Sometimes we need to be strong. We need to be forceful. And sometimes we need, to say that is not okay. And that can be helpful, but it can be a slippery slope, right? As long as we're not slipping into, berating the other person, right? Insulting the other person, then it could be helpful. But still, at the same time, it's maybe more beneficial to try to keep a more peaceful mind.
Yeah, I think it's complicated because even if I got the cable installed, I might have my inner winds and whatnot all churny, right? That
Yeah,
isn't probably
yeah,
too
yeah,
helpful.
exactly. And then you can just feel agitated for the rest of the day. And then when we have kind of an underlying base point of agitation, and then when people, right, then we can easily get triggered into anger or impatience or, right, unhelpful speech, snapping at people, things like that, right? So having the peaceful mind is preferable. But of course, we're sentient beings and we're not Buddhas yet. So of course our minds still get agitated. But the idea is to try to keep it at a low level, right? If we can't let it go completely, put it at a low level. So
Example that touches on a lot of the
anybody else have comments about whether anger can be, oh, actually, let me just finish the other two bullets, and then let's open it up to see what people think about anger being constructive or unconstructive. So anger might be constructive, but only, right, when it prevents harm to oneself or others, but only if it's not lashing out or trying to harm. But anger must be directed at the action or the behavior, not the person, right? So like, you guys need to get this right, right? The behavior, the action of, not doing the job in the right way, right? We can direct it at that, not directing our anger at the person. And then anger can motivate or alert us that something in our life needs to change, stop us from feeling blocked. And where this comes from is if we're repressing anger, right? If we're a target of abuse or target of mistreatment, and we're just taking it, like the abused wife or that, it's just, right, in psychology, we could say it's really helpful when the abused is, finally gets angry. It's like, no, that's not okay anymore. Because sometimes people feel like they deserve the mistreatment. So anger in the sense of triggering that's not okay, can be very healthy as long as doesn't move into the. So opening that up to if anybody else has, or if anybody has any further comments or questions at that point.
Can you hear it? This is Heather. Can you hear me?
Not really.
It's a little fuzzy, Heather.
Huh. Why? Let me try to do something else if somebody else has something.
I got a question for you, Emily. And that's just thinking about this in terms of Buddhist psychology in general. So what I'm trying to understand is what's the difference between aversion and anger, or the difference between a feeling and a volitional factor?
So yeah, aversion would be not as strong as anger, right? Our aversion doesn't, I think aversion is a broader category, right? Anger is necessarily aversion, but aversion is not necessarily anger. Right? So anger in Buddhism is necessarily includes that malice or intent to harm or wanting to lash out. So aversion is not necessarily that. Aversion, so, and then the difference between feeling and volition. So feeling in Buddhism is a different mental factor, right? So feeling is just an experience of pleasure, pain, or neutral. Feeling, right? And we'll get to that in the context of anger. So anger is a response, and aversion is also a response to unpleasant feeling. So feeling is something very simple in Buddhism. It's not like love isn't a feeling, compassion is not considered a feeling, right? Emotions are not considered feelings. Feeling is just pleasant experience, unpleasant experience, or neutral. Whereas volition, or the mental factor of intention, is a mental urge, and it's in response to the feeling. Okay? So we have a feeling of pain, and then the volition and the mental factor of intention is moving away from the pain. The mental urge to move away from the pain, or the mental urge to lash out, or the mental urge to say something harsh. Or in the context of attachment, or a pleasant feeling. Attachment is a response to a pleasant feeling, a pleasurable feeling, and then in response to that, we have a mental urge to keep that feeling, to hang on to that feeling, to hang on to the object that triggered it. Right, so there's a feeling, and then there's a mental urge that's a response to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I understand. So they are categorically different, right? It's just that the feeling is the thing it occurs first and is primary, and then the volition is something that's built out of that, like a response to that initial feeling.
I would say that most of the time it's like that. But not necessarily. Sometimes we have an intention or a volition that is moving toward an anticipated feeling, right? And we talked about this last week in terms of, right, our attachments or desires oftentimes are moving toward an anticipated delicious, food, anticipated pleasure of good company, anticipated, happiness of taking that vacation. So it's not necessarily that the pleasure comes first or the feeling comes first, but they are distinct, different mental factors. And I mean, another distinction, and I shouldn't get into this more, is feeling is said in the Dharma to be the ripening of a previous karma. It's a karmic result. Feeling is a karmic result. Like a pleasant feeling is a karmic result of a previous positive karma. But unpleasant feeling is the karmic result of a previous negative karma. Whereas volition is the creation of new karma. The volition is a mental movement, a mental urge and a mental movement which creates new karma. the feeling doesn't create new karma. What we do with that feeling creates new karma. What we do with that is the volition that creates new karma. So feeling is a result of previous karma, and volition is creating new karma. And of course, volition is very much influenced, like what we do is very much influenced by our previous habits and our previous habits. But volition is actually creating.
Does that mean that they have a different temporal dimension too? So that feeling essentially has no temporal dimension, but a volition necessarily has a temporal dimension that it's looking forward.
What do you mean the feeling doesn't have a temporal dimension?
It seems to me that in other words, one could only experience it in time, but it doesn't have a sense of like being directed toward the past or the future, whereas a volition necessarily is directed toward the future.
I'm not so sure about that. Burke, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, in a sense it is, because volition is creating a new karma for the future. But, you know, and I actually am not super fond of the translation of the Tibetan word for volition. Because volition also, you know, implies that we're making a conscious choice. But that mental factor is not necessarily referring to a conscious choice. It's like it's a movement of mind. So it might just be a reaction. And oftentimes it is just a reaction, right? Like the angry reaction to somebody harming me, you know, the angry reaction when someone says something insulting, angry action, right, when someone's mistreating me or disrespecting. Right? There's an angry reaction that is that mental factor of intention or volition. It's not necessarily volitional, right? I mean, it could just be. So I mean, that's what I can say right now, Burke. I don't want to go and take more time in this class, but I'm happy to discuss this with you offline if you want.
Thanks, that's all really helpful. Thank you, Emily.
Heather, did you have something on this?
I'm not sure if you can hear me for some reason, so that's fine.
It's a little fuzzy, Heather. You could type it in the chat, I suppose.
I don't think it's that important. I just didn't hear.
Why I have all of this new stuff and none of it works.
So now we can hear you.
Oh, you can? Okay. I was saying, I'm working on not getting angry that I have all of this new equipment and none of it seems to work. But anyway, it's not that important. I'm good.
All right, let's go back to 2 slides before this. Disadvantages to anger. So I received a teaching. I told you this before, but I received a teaching from Lomzopa Rinpoche some years ago, where he was saying that sometimes we want to get angry, want to lash out, we want to verbal bullets. And that really got me thinking of, sometimes we really do, you know, sometimes it seems that the most sensible reaction to this situation is to get angry. They completely deserve it. Anger is totally justified. And so that is an interesting point. I mean, sometimes is true, when somebody does harm, that it feels completely justified. Yeah. They've done wrong, so but the point in the Dharma is that even though anger may be justified, and even though anger is understandable and anger is natural, anger doesn't actually, our anger in the sense of the Dharma, in the sense of lashing out, never turns out well. It doesn't turn out well for ourselves, others. And the key is to become convinced in our own minds of that. Right? And to become convinced in our own minds of that when we're not in the midst of anger. When we're in the midst of anger, we don't want to hear it, right? We think that it's usual. But when we're not angry, when we're calm, it's very useful to really contemplate the disadvantages. So the first one is it damages our mental well-being, our mental happiness, our mental peace, and it obstructs our spiritual progress. So the Dharma practice is very much about creating positive mental habits, creating constructive mental habits, creating positive mental, positive imprints on our mental continuum, and reducing reducing the negative imprints that we are putting on our mental continuum. And purifying the negative imprints that are already there. So anger is putting a lot of negative imprints on our minds, which will result in mental unhappiness, unhappiness in our minds now, agitation in our minds now, and the habit of being unhappy in our mind, unhappy in the future. Being agitated in the future, and then and obstructing our spiritual progress. Anger is said to be the most destructive. Anger and wrong view, but anger can destroy our roots of virtue. Powerful enough, and if it's long lasting enough, and then it's directed at, especially at a bodhisattva or a Buddha. And then anger can do harm to others and can lead to hatred and violence, which we see so much of in the world today, so much of in this country. Yeah, we can see how destructive it is. So many people. This is one of the big problems, in my view. Interpersonal costs for anger causes us to lash out, accuse, etc., and damages our relationships, damages the trust in our relationship, damages the goodwill that takes years to build up, and then one moment of anger can damage or ruin the trust that we've taken so long to build up. Also, as I was mentioning, people who tend to get angry a lot, they often become isolated. People don't want to be around them. they get lost. People get, get very angry. People tend to fear. And so if we get angry because, right, we're not getting the support we need and we yell, then we may get their attention in the moment, but people are less likely to want to support us in the future, to be there for us in the future, to help us. And then the health effects of anger, right? So anger has been linked to heart disease and high blood pressure, digestive problems, ulcers, etc. And then, of course, we create negative karma, which brings about more painful circumstances. And then in the next slide, I just wanted to share a quote by the Buddha. Hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. Right, so we see this so starkly in the Middle East, right? The Israelis and the Palestinians. Yeah. One side bombs the other, and then the other side bombs them back, and then it just escalates. So let's go 2 slides ahead to the opposite of anger. Patience. So in the Dharma, patience is a mind that remains undisturbed in the face of harm or when pain or difficulties occur. So patience is right the opposite of anger. It's the antidote to anger. And so patience is not right pretending that everything is okay. Patience is a mind that's genuinely undisturbed in the face of harm or pain, right? Which is a lot harder. And this is what we were discussing a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about working with the afflictions. It's not about suppressing the affliction. You need to acknowledge that the affliction is there, and then try to counteract it, work with it. And the next slide, Geshe Soka says the ability, right, so with patience, the ability to not be bothered by difficulties comes from understanding. Patience is accepting whatever happens because we understand the nature of the situation. So this is critical. So we become patient through understanding what's going on for ourselves, understanding what's going on for others, understanding that others are not intentionally trying to hurt us, understanding our own anger, understanding right what triggers our anger, what exaggerations we're undergoing in order to which exacerbates our anger. Okay, I better speed up. We're running out of time. The next slide, just really quickly, Chodron says that being patient does not mean being passive. Rather, it gives us the clarity of mind necessary to act or not act. Right? So patience doesn't mean being passive in the face of harm. It means that our mind remains undisturbed, so therefore it can remain clear and we can see what is the most beneficial. And like we've said before, and I'll say it again because it's so important, is that patience, right? Patience and compassion, right? Means patience or compassion toward the person, but the compassionate thing is to try to counteract the harmful behavior if we can. And the foundation of compassion and wisdom says that to practice patience is to taste the power of mind. So, really think about it, the ability to remain undisturbed is really, that is the true powerful mind, true strength. Or as Shanti gave us, says, that is the true hero, true warrior, the one who has conquered their own anger, who is able to remain patient. Okay, the next slide is anger as a reaction to pain. A painful feeling or an unpleasant feeling. It might be a physical pain, it might be mental pain, it might be emotional pain. So in the next slide is some examples. So we may react like a painful feeling like frustration when we're obstructed from something we want. Frustration at our computer that's not operating okay, or frustration at the traffic that we're caught up in, or frustration at our coworkers who are behind on their project. Or it could be a reaction to a situation such as injustice, harmful behavior, unfair treatment, being falsely accused, a reaction to being hurt, afraid, hopeless, loneliness, abandonment, sadness, humiliation, overwhelm, disappointment, etc. So personally, I find it really, really helpful to get to know what our anger triggers are. When I taught anger management, I would have people fill out an anger log, and and when I did that, I found that probably the most helpful exercise for me. And then I got to know my anger patterns, and oftentimes it's just like one or two patterns that trigger all of our, most if not all of our anger episodes. It might be we're habitually angry when we get hurt, or we're habitually angry when people treat us with disrespect. Habitually angry when we feel unsupported. Right? So it's very useful to understand, what those anger themes are for us, what triggers them, because then we can, if we work on that one trigger, that can help dissolve all of our anger episodes, most of our anger. Or another common one is someone breaking a rule. Someone isn't wearing a mask like they're supposed to. That might trigger. So yeah, so understanding what that pain trigger is can be really helpful. And in the next slide, so anger doesn't arise directly from the pain, it's a reaction. So anger arises from our negative thinking, or negative exaggerated thinking, as we inappropriate attention. So anger is always exaggerating something. The next slide is a brief graphic. So the negative thinking, the negative exaggerated thinking is what escalates, exacerbates. Right? So we may feel if somebody cuts us off on the road or says something rude to us, right? There's like this moment which, kind of we're in shock. And then there's a moment of choice, right? There's a moment of choice of, okay, do I just let it go, or do I start the conceptualization? ruminating about how awful that person is. And, right, and if we choose the negative thinking route, that's what will actually trigger and escalate the. The next slide, issue reactance is just as anger over-exaggerates the attractiveness of the object. Anger is a misconception that over-exaggerates the displeasing aspect of the object. When we are disturbed by strong attachment or anger, we always tend to think that the good or bad qualities we see are intrinsic properties of the object, right? We think that the unattractiveness is in the object, or, ugliness is in the object or in the person, and then we oftentimes exaggerate that even further. Only the unattractive of that person or that object, and not seeing it in a balanced way, losing sight of the positive quality. So we've discussed that before. And then the next slide, some common themes of the negative exaggerated thinking. Of course, it's always exaggerating, thinking that the negative qualities belong to them, are from their side, and that's really hard to let go of, right? Yeah, that's a big subject, emptiness. Another common theme is blaming. Anger involves blaming. We're experiencing something painful or unpleasant, and then anger arises when we blame someone. Oftentimes blaming a person, the other person, but it might be blaming ourselves and turning against ourselves. So it's their fault or our fault. Attachment to shoulds. People should behave in a particular way. People should, be on time. People should not drive slowly and fast. Should. This is a big anger thing, being attached to our shoulds. Of course, it's helpful and useful to have a healthy sense of ethics and things. But when we become overly attached to them, then we become angry when people violate our rules. Catastrophizing, magnifying, solidifying the other person. So getting angry at the person. The person is terrible versus their behavior. One helpful mind shift is focusing on the behavior rather than the terribleness of the person. And of course, always solidifying the me most of the time. Okay, and the next slide, just really briefly, what I added on top of the negative thinking box is our emotions database, which is talked about in the Cultivating Emotion Balance courses. This is helpful. Understand what is in our emotions database. In other words, what is our history? What are our emotional buttons? It might be a lot of it from childhood. Maybe our father talked to us in a certain tone of voice, and so when anybody talks to us in a tone of voice, that triggers our anger. So understanding that understanding what our emotions database can be really helpful. What is our emotional history? Maybe abandonment, we're abandoned, and that makes us, that triggers our anger and despair. Knowing what that is, what's in our emotions. All right, so I'm gonna skip forward to a few more slides to slide 31. Actually, the one before that. So dealing with anger, right? The first thing is to stop. Don't react, right? Don't say anything. Don't write an email. Don't act out of anger. Whatever we do when we're in the midst of anger is likely to make the situation worse. So just being mindful and noticing the thoughts and physical sensations that arise. Maybe we notice, right, tightness. We may notice heat in our body, agitation in our body. So very helpful to just be mindful and notice the physical sensations in our body. Notice the thoughts with distance, right? So observing thoughts and trying not to feed the thoughts, not getting into the thought, not justifying the thought, just noticing the thoughts that are arising without reacting. And then if we need to take a time out, right? Taking distance from the person or the situation can be super helpful. Taking a walk, or just breathing. Don't feed your negative thoughts. Watch them or try to apply antidotes, and then when we're calmer, we're better able to deal with the situation constructively. So the next slide is a quote I love by Viktor Frankl. Right. So Viktor Frankl is the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who wrote A Man's Search for Meaning about how he survived the Holocaust and by finding meaning in his life. And the quote goes, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response, so that space is critical. Finding the space after experiencing, right, we experience the pain, we experience the unpleasant, right, the unpleasant. We experience the harm that's done. And then finding that space, expanding that space between the stimulus of the pain and so when we can access that space, then we have the chance to respond rather than react. So that is so much of our practice of patience, so much of our practice in dealing with the mental affliction, finding that space, expanding that space and responding rather than reacting. Responding constructively. And in that response lies our. So I find that to be very much a Dharma quote. And then the next slide is not often talked about in Tibetan Buddhism, but Thich Nhat Hanh talks about it, and I find it super helpful in that looking, trying to understand what's going on for us when we're getting angry. What is going on? What was the trigger? What are the feelings underneath my anger? What was I needing that I didn't get? Maybe it's respect. Maybe it was cooperation. Maybe it was support. Maybe it was validation. Maybe it was closeness. Like what was the need not met? To understand our emotional history. And then once we calm down and we're looking at the other person's, their pain, their stress, their needs, their feelings, their limitations. That just doing those things, I find, can dissolve most of our anger. And then in the next slide, I'm sorry I'm going so fast. I'm going to pause. So when we get angry, so Thich Nhat Hanh has this beautiful quote, and I'm actually going to read the whole quote. When you get angry, go back to yourself. Take very good care of your anger. And when someone makes you suffer, go back and take care of your suffering and your anger. Do not say or do anything. Whatever you say or do in the state of anger may cause more damage. Most of us don't do that. We don't want to go back to ourselves. We want to follow the other person or her. If your house is on fire, the most urgent thing to do is to go back and try to put out the fire, not to run after the person who needs arsonist. If you run after the person you suspect has burned your house will burn down while you're chasing him. That is not wise. You must go back and put out the fire. So when you are angry, if you continue to interact with or argue with the other person, if you are trying to punish her for acting exactly like someone who runs after you while your house goes. And then the next slide, some other antidotes to anger, remembering impermanence. Going through maybe difficulties in our relationship that's causing a lot of pain and anger, remembering impermanence. Or if we have anger toward the current political situation, remembering impermanence can be super helpful. Yeah, because a lot of our suffering is have this expectation or an unconscious feeling that it's going to go on forever. Reflecting on the various causes and conditions that brought about the frustrating situation, right? The other person's limitations. Maybe the other person had a really difficult childhood, can be very helpful. And also how we have contributed to the situation, the difficult situation. That's difficult, can be difficult to look at. And remembering that this is a result of our karma. This is really, really helpful if we're willing to go there. That this situation would not be arising if I hadn't created the cause for it. That can cut the blaming right there. Right? If we cut the blame right there, that can cut the anger right there. Trying to understand the other person. Accepting the pain or difficult situation without reacting. So this is another thing that in the Dharma it talks about, and the Shantideva talks about is, right, is anger comes from an inability to bear the pain. You can't just be with the pain and accept the pain, right? The anger comes when we react to the pain. So Shantideva talks a lot about learning how to just bear difficulty And then through familiarization, we can learn to bear more and more difficulties without getting. I think what just popped in my mind is it can be like the difficulties of bringing up a small child, right? And you just learn to remain calm in the middle of, right, the temper tantrums and and all of all of the challenges of parenting. Right? I mean, I think over time, most parents learn to bear the challenges of children better. And then, right, and then in our practice of patience, we're learning, and we learn, I mean, I don't know, we learn to bear it. I think parents learn to bear the difficulties of raising their children because they love their children, right? Because you don't lose sight of the love. And I find that is really key in the practice of patience. That is, right? You can disagree with the other person. You can argue with the other person, right? Have a political argument. But if you lose track of the caring for the other person, lose track of love, lose track of the other person's humanity, that is where the anger, the strong anger and hatred, kick in. And and so all of the meditations on compassion and seeing, developing equanimity, seeing everyone as our brother or sister, our parents, that's so helpful. Keep the sense of caring, keep the sense of their humanity. Right, or arguing with our spouse, if we keep sight of the love, then it doesn't escalate into. And then another antidote that is talked about a lot in Tibetan Buddhism is taking the difficult situation as a learning opportunity. An opportunity to practice patience. Feeling now, and this is a very advanced practice, I find, is being grateful for the difficult person. Without difficult people, without difficult situations, can't perfect our practice of patience. And without perfecting our practice of patience, can't actualize our potential, can't attain. So I'm seeing this as a great opportunity to strengthen our practice, to strengthen our patience, to strengthen our mind. Not easy, but if we can remember, it's really helpful. So we can't perfect our patience, and we can't even practice our patience without difficult situations. So we need them on the path. And there's the famous story of Atisha when he came to Tibet. He brought a very difficult assistant. Sometimes I've heard cook, and sometimes I've heard assistant. Atisha's other disciples would complain about this cook and asked Atisha why he hangs out with this guy. And Atisha said, well, this is doing this to practice. So at that level, you purposely, and at Lama Zopa Rinpoche's level, you purposely seek out difficult situations. Practice. Okay, so there's more slides. But I want to open it up to see if people have other helpful suggestions for dealing with anger that you have experienced, you have had, have had success with, or if you have any other questions or comments on the subject. Sorry, I've been doing all the yammering in the. No, nothing.
I can just say biting the tongue really does work sometimes.
Sorry, I missed that.
Biting your tongue and just bite it. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I find that one of my challenges, I'm better at now, but in the past, writing an email, sending out an email immediately when I get a email, or unacceptable email, sending out that email immediately and
Yeah.
instead waiting.
Yeah. Email's not a great way to resolve conflicts. Call somebody up.
Okay. So I'm gonna actually ask Heather to jump to the end. I think slide 42. Yeah. So one thing I've noticed is to try not to get stuck in our anger, right? Like, so anger will flash, anger will arise, but trying not to get stuck in it. And trying to move, like trying to keep things moving, right? Trying, like, even though the negative thoughts may automatically occur, but try to move through it, like to do anything to move through it, right? It might be taking a walk, or it might be just saying a mantra, like for example, I used to use maybe happy, maybe happy, maybe happy, maybe happy, maybe happy, maybe happy, right? When I'm pissed off at somebody, maybe happy, maybe happy, maybe happy, maybe happy. And I won't mean it, right? For a while, but after, if I say it long enough, sometimes it starts to dissolve the anger. It turns your attention away from the negative narrative that going through your head, and counteracting that. That is very simple, and I find that can be really helpful. And then the next slide might be useful when we're feeling emotional and ready to act, ready to say something, ready to write an email. We can ask ourselves, what I'm about to say helpful to me, helpful to others, and helpful to the world? So anyway, that was a lot to cover in one class. I'm sorry to bombard you with so much. Hopefully there was something useful there. Next week, my idea is to cover the 12 links, though I'm wondering if you want to cover the 12 links, or if you want to do a meditation on anger. I think doing an anger meditation, there's one in particular that I was going to do, I find is really helpful. Or we could try to do a bit of each, just go less into the 12. So wondering what anybody has a preference.
I love the 12 links, but
Maybe we can do a bit of both, Emily.
Okay, let's try to do both. Why don't we start with the meditation on anger, and then I'll go through the 12 links in rapid fashion. That's a big subject, and actually the week after that I'm going to be doing a 3-hour half day on the 12 links for a different center. So if any of you want to go deeper into the 12 links, that's an option. It'll be on a Sunday morning, November 1st. Okay. Finally, one other question I'm going to ask you is, so the next, Catherine says that the board is in favor of me doing another module on discovering Buddhism before the end of the year. And so I thought to do a combination of bodhicitta and mind transformation. So we did some bodhicitta this summer. I thought to kind of do a part 2 of bodhicitta, and then do some more thought transformation, mind transformation, or transforming problems. We could do that, or we could do emptiness. I'm wondering if anybody has a preference for what module you want to do next.
they're both good.
Emily, I might lean toward bodhicitta.
One vote for bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is the next one in the series. So my feeling is emptiness might be a little bit heavy just during the holiday season. Yeah. And we've done a lot of emptiness between the Mahamudra and the Heart Sutra, and the special insight. I've done emptiness with your group a number of times.
Good.
Okay, we'll go with that then. So let's dedicate. So any positive energy or merit we've created, may it help us along toward our path toward greater wellness, peace of mind, true happiness. Toward reaching our complete enlightenment, our highest potential. So that we can be more beneficial to our friends and family, to those we don't even know, to those we work with, even to the difficult ones. Maybe more effective in helping others in their suffering and their anger and their despair. And toward a long life, good health of all of our spiritual masters. May they come back and continue to teach us again and again until we're all enlightened. Okay, thank you very much. Have a
Thank
good,
you, Emily.
good luck.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.